Okay, I hope this works. I've had a little bit of an issue with Cultura, so I hope that you all can see me and understand what I'm saying and seeing. So anyway, hi, good night. Hi everyone. Sorry I'm a night late. I apologize for that. And I also hope that you can see and hear. I've had a little bit of an issue uploading on Blackboard, so I'm going to try it again. I am reviewing the article Uncloaking Terroristic Networks by Valdis Krebs. And it really is a very interesting look at the terrorist networks that really arose out of the 9/11 attacks. And obviously, before 9/11, these networks were certainly in the process. So I'm going to read the abstract to you, and then I will work my way through the article and try to summarize it as best I can. So the abstract looks at mapping covert networks using data available from news sources on the World Wide Web. Specifically, the article examines the networks surrounding the tragic events of September 11th. Through this data, they're able to map relationships and how this network and these relationships focused on the 19 hijackers that were responsible for all the 9/11 attacks. The mapping provides some insight into the terrorist organization, but it really is incomplete, but it allows us to see patterns in data, which is really, really interesting. This is something I think is fascinating from the standpoint of when we can look at data and we begin to see patterns, we can begin to make some predictions. And I think that is what this article is driving at. So what the author did was he really started looking at the connections that were being made by all the people that were on the plane and on the ground prior to and after 9/11. And he looked at three problems that were associated with this social network that really focused on criminal activity. They are incompleteness, the inevitability of missing nodes or links that investigators will not be able to cover, fuzzy boundaries, which is the difficulty in deciding who to include and who not to include, and that is the sources of the individuals in the data, who to include and who not to include, and the dynamic. These networks aren't static, they're always changing, so that puts them in a dynamic category. So instead of looking at the presence or absence of the ties between individuals, he suggests looking at the strength of the tie depending on the time and the task at hand, which I thought was really, really interesting. There are two authors, Wayne Baker and Robert Faulkner, suggest looking in archival data to retrieve relationships. The data they use to analyze legal price-fixing networks, this is just an example, were mostly came out of court documents. So he's trying to show us where we can find sources of data by which we can begin to see these patterns. So I'm going to now focus on data gathering and how that process worked for this author. They knew there were 19 hijackers. They knew which planes they were on, what nation's passports they used to get into America. And as more information about the hijackers were uncovered, he decided to link and map three strengths that were common in these individuals. The tie, or how they knew each other, was governed by the amount of time they spent together. So the longer they spent together, the stronger the tie. And the weak ties were those that really, of course, did not spend much time together, but still had a connection through the project or through this act that they were focusing on. So after 9/11, by the middle of October of that year, there was enough data, and I'm going to show you a diagram here in just a minute, available that they could start seeing patterns and making connections with those that were in this terrorist ring. And here's the first diagram right here. I hope you can see it. But as you can see, Muhammad Atta, as we all know, was the mastermind behind this whole operation. And he's right here where I'm pointing my finger. And I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but there are obvious lines that emanate from his name that have many, many, many connections. And that represents a very strong tie with pretty much this central group right here. They organize themselves. Here is another diagram that focuses on, and you can see the patterns emerging actually. So it's really, really interesting. And let me give you, there's Muhammad Atta right there. So he had connections here and here and here. And from those people, those connections sprang up. So that's how they were able to work. Who knows how long they've been working, probably a long, long time. But this particular diagram I just showed you really didn't recommend strong ties at this point. They call each other cell members. That's really interesting that all of these connections they formed cells of relationships. I'm going to quote some of the issues from the article. There were two things that the author found very interesting. Those who were trained to fly didn't know the other flyers. And one group of people didn't know the other group. So it's clear from reading this, and I really do recommend you reading it because it's a fascinating article, that they may have known of each other, but they may have never met. And they had networks in places like Las Vegas. And those meetings and those ties then disseminated out to the rest of the networks, or diffused to the rest of the networks. They added shortcuts to collaborate and coordinate. These shortcuts reduced the average path length in the network by over 40%. So the shortcuts allowed information to be diffused in a short period of time, in a short distance, and that was able to move throughout this network. I'm going to show you another, I'm going to circle it in blue so maybe you'll see it, but this diagram shows where the ringleader was, Muhammad Atta, right there, and then the shortcuts and how the network diffused through all of these different people that were part of the hijackers. You have to say that they were pretty savvy. They did not work alone. They had other accomplices that did not get on the planes. These co-conspirators were conduits for money and also provided needed skills and knowledge. So the network was strong enough to get all of that where it needed to be. This next diagram I'm going to show you, it blew my mind the minute I saw it, and you might find it interesting. And then I'm going to go into looking at actual data in the neighborhood. But this is the total network, and I hope you can see it all, of how they diffused and who diffused information to this group for all these cells to participate in 9/11. So, because I said earlier that some of the group knew each other, some didn't, I'm now going to talk about the diagram and the metrics that kind of emanates from Muhammad Atta's activity. The closest Closeness measures his ability to access others in the network and monitor what's happening. The betweenness column shows his control over the flow of the network. So he really controlled what went in and what went out. He was more or less the broker of all of this information to make sure it got to the right channels. So if you do get a chance to look at figure 4, and I'm not going to hold it up because it's really very complicated, the degrees, or the degrees separated, is 0.361, which, and his betweenness, which means his control, was almost 0.6%, and his closeness. So he was, all of this data suggests, and it shows how close and how much in control he was of all the data that was being diffused to the process. The diagram, the figure 4, goes on to show all of the people involved and their degree of closeness and betweenness, and how far removed, the lesser the number, the further removed they were from the main group, and how they communicated is just beyond me. So the least, there was a 0.00, several 0.0s with regard to closeness and betweenness, but they were still part of the process. So this really is related to social network analysis. This process has a long history to evidence mapping in both fraud and criminal conspiracy cases. So it's clear when you look at where the lines connect and intersect, the pattern, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but the pattern, and you can emerge, all of that emerges to form kind of a picture, and you can almost predict the next behavior. Once the investigators knew whom to look at, they quickly found the connections among the hijackers and also discovered several of the hijackers' associates. It goes on to say, we must be careful of guilt by association. Being linked to a terrorist does not prove guilt, but it does invite investigation, which is what this author went on to do. There were strong ties between members of the hijacker network and outsiders. Some of them were non-existent. It was often reported that the hijackers kept to themselves. They did not make friends outside their trusted circle. They would rarely interact with others, and then often one of them would speak for the whole group. Eliminating boundaries spanning ties reduces the visibility of the network, so they're able to keep behind the scenes. And chances of leaks out of the network are very, very minimal. So to conclude, to draw an accurate picture of a covert network, we need to identify task and trust ties between the conspirators. Who's doing what, when. The data occasionally is difficult to unearth, but with these criminals, the task is enormous and may be impossible to complete. But I think this author has done a really, really good job. The best solution for network disruption may be to discover possible suspects and then, via sampling, map individual personal networks, see whom else they lead to and where they overlap. And because we have kind of this benchmark, or this benchmark, that's a good word, sorry, we can use this and maybe predict future activities if we know ahead of time or have information that we can begin to map. So I really, really encourage you to read it. I thought it was really fascinating on how the author was able to take a look at all the connections and the lack of connection between all the people that were involved in 9/11, and they were able to make certain arrests and criminal charges against them. So that concludes my article review. I will tell you I'm not going to be with you all next Wednesday. I'm going to be in Dallas on business. So I'm sorry to miss. But two things. I want to wish the group going to Trinidad and Tobago a great trip and be safe. And to everyone else, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you on December 2nd.